While we wait to see how Joe Biden will respond to Iran, perhaps we'll get World War III. In the meantime, of course, we have to talk about civil war here in this United States. Putin ally warns Texas border battle could spark civil war in the U.S., even more destructive. I believe that Russia, China, communists, just in general, the left, this is their hope and their goal. Because the win condition for the left in the United States is civil war. That is not winning a civil war. It is starting one. I know it sounds kind of weird, but like, wait, what do you mean? The win condition for them is starting a war? What if they lose it? Doesn't matter. Once the war starts, they've gotten everything they've wanted. First, they hate this country. They hate Israel. They want the U.S. to stop funding Israel and many other countries. They want the U.S. to stop being involved in intervention in general. I don't completely disagree with anti-intervention, but it is a component of what they want. And the U.S. breaking apart or fighting in a civil war shuts down U.S. foreign policy to a great degree. It fragments it to going from world police to please help us, I beg of you, we need weapons. The other issue is that it immediately allows the suspension of all civil rights in the country, and we've already seen this. So my point, national divorce, whatever you want to call it, civil war, secession, intrastate conflict, whatever, interstate conflict, it results in the left winning. And that's really just it. You know, I've had this conversation with many people who have been in favor of national divorce. That's the goal. The goal is the U.S. rips itself apart. You know, following that, it's not an argument still for or against, because there are many people who say, so what? Why? In the event of a civil war, even if it does give the left consolidated power over the federal government and the U.S. military, it still allows people who oppose them to live in their own way. That is to say that if a fight were to break out in the United States and the states formed factions, the left may get what they want in their states, but it would still create enclaves where people on the right get to live the way they want. Because the federal government would not have the capabilities of actually seizing control of every single secessionist state. It wouldn't work. Maybe slowly over time, if the battle was lost, they could go march one by one with massive power into each of these states and take control of them. But I want to talk about all of this and exactly what's going on right now at the Texas border battle. Because it's not just a Putin ally. Take a look at this from The Nation. GOP border theatrics have escalated to threats of civil war. Now, sure, I think The Nation is lying. I think the left is lying. It's what they do. It's what they do. You get all these leftists who, for some reason, push the lie that I advocate for civil war. Yeah, quite literally, the whole opening of this video is me explaining why you don't want it. Why I've repeatedly stated that national divorce, peaceful divorce, balkanization, whatever you want to call it, there will be nothing but war following this. And it is the left winning. And that's, of course, why they lie. They need you to believe it is actually I or people like me who want civil war. So when it happens, they can justify the suspension of your rights and weaponization and war against their perceived enemies. That is to say, when war happens, they'll say, oh no, these dangerous right-wing MAGA chud blah, blah, blah maggots, you don't want them to come in and cause harm, do you? We need to suspend rights just for a little bit. And these people will say, you know what? You're right. You're right. These people are bad. They wanted civil war the whole time. The Nation writes, it's shaping up to be a banner week in the theater of incoherent rage known as Republican border politics. To begin with, a bipartisan accord on the border enforcement that GOP leaders loudly and repeatedly stressed was the baseline condition for backing $100 billion plus funding package. Blah, 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 lies. I don't need the border deal. The bill that Biden says he needs, it allows 5,000 criminal aliens to enter the country every day. I don't see that as a deal. I see that as status quo under Joe Biden. But I digress. The GOP's desperate backpedaling on the border deal, which is, again, it's a lie. You know what? And we called this too. Joe Biden comes out and says, I got a border deal. We're going to secure the border. And then Republicans say, this is not a border deal. This is you saying 5,000 criminal aliens per day. We say no. Then Biden comes out. Republicans said no. And Democrats go, duh, why? Because they read stuff like this. Backpedaling, blah, blah, blah. Oklahoma GOP Senator James Langford succumbed to a rare moment of right-wing candor as he marveled over the heavy breathing opposition in his own party during a weekend Fox News program, blah, blah, blah. It is interesting to see Republicans 4 months ago would not give funding for Ukraine, for Israel, for our southern border, because we demanded changes in policy. A few months later, when we're finally getting to the end, they're like, oh, just kidding. I actually don't want a change in law because it's a presidential election year. That's just not true. The issue is Joe Biden has utterly failed on the border. CBP is assisting human smugglers. And where we are right now is there is no deal. The Nation also writes, Texas is spoiling for a civil war. As Governor Greg Abbott escalates his fight with the Biden administration, he is sounding a lot like an old Confederate. Oh, boy. Many Democrats treat the Empire of Texas as an alarming sideshow. The Nation is impossible to read, by the way, because they don't just tell you what's going on. They give you this stupid garbage. I don't care. That opening sentence is pointless. I just want to stress this, too. Okay, guys. Ellie Mistel? I don't know. Whatever. Many Democrats treat the Empire of Texas as an alarming sideshow. What idea was conveyed by telling me that? Sure, the state executes the most people in the country, places bounties. None of this does anything to tell me about what is going on. Texas doesn't want to leave. It wants to invade the rest of the United States and remake the country in its own Christo-fascist image. Moreover, as is typical with these states' rights types, the definition of freedom envisaged by the white guys running Texas is one where they are the only ones forever free, and they are allowed to subjugate women and people of color and blah, blah, blah. You get the point. Garbled, incoherent nonsense. Well, here we are. This is an interesting thread from James Lindsay breaking down the plan. James I believe he's correct on his assessment. He says, here's a fun fact. Being super frustrated about something effectively lowers your functional IQ by at least 20 points. That said, it's time to talk a bit about the terrible idea of national divorce, secession, balkanization, civil war, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna summarize, make it really quick for you. There's a few ideas to consider. First, before we get to the idea of secession or civil war, we have the big sort. Conservatives leave New York and move to Florida. Liberals leave West Virginia and go to California. And all the blue people live in the blue areas and the red people live in the red areas. That's just precursor to civil war. I've long said this. Yes, we can talk about leaving cities that I understand and going to places that are better suited, but be warned, this is geographic hyperpolarization. And so a lot of people are like, Tim says, move and get out of the cities. Yes, I have absolutely said, get out of the cities because they will destroy you. However, I don't know exactly what should be done, whether I don't have a good answer for you. Forgive me, I can't see the future. Getting out of the cities does not mean leaving your state. It doesn't necessarily mean going to Florida. And I don't know that in the end it's a good thing. And we have actually mentioned the benefits to staying in cities and pushing back. But here's how I feel right now. If you stay in these cities, they will crush you. If you get out of the cities, moving somewhat a ways, but still in the general area, you can be more successful and resist. But it only works if you do resist, speak up, organize, and challenge these machines. In the end, it may be impossible. And the only thing you can do, I suppose, is move to a red state. It feels like when I look at the math of all of this, the end result is, again, it's dominoes falling over. I don't know what you think you can do. The big sword is national divorce light, as James Lindsay calls it, but it's actually an idea from a book where like-minded individuals conservatives move to right-wing areas and left to the left, and then you get geographic hyperpolarization, which results in civil war. Why? The scenario I often give is Oklahoma and Colorado. Oklahoma has banned abortion. Colorado now permits it up to the point of birth. You get a scenario where a woman and a man are in a relationship. 7 months into a pregnancy, she decides this guy's actually really bad. Her friends talk to her and say, you cannot be with him. She's embarrassed. She's ashamed and she doesn't like the guy anymore. And so she says, if I have a baby with him, we are stuck here forever. So she decides to get an abortion. Hey, it's her body, her choice. So the left says. The man, surprised, says she's going to kill my son. She flees to Colorado. Oklahoma says, leaving the state to commit murder is murder. Just because Colorado says it's allowed doesn't mean we allow that. And they demand her return, her extradition back to the state. You end up with budding conflict where Colorado says no. Oklahoma says, how dare you? And what happens when Oklahoma State law enforcement troopers are chasing this woman in her vehicle as she's rushing full speed to the border, knowing that if she gets caught, she's having that baby, and if she can cross that border, she can terminate the pregnancy. She makes it to the border. The car brakes. She gets out. She's running. She's 10 feet. And the police say, freeze, and she refuses. She crosses the border. Colorado law enforcement is waiting, and they put their hands up and say, stop. We're not going to allow you to take this woman. Maybe the woman's a resident of Colorado. Maybe she's from Colorado. Her family's there. She moves to Oklahoma. It's not too far. I don't know. It's an extreme scenario, I suppose. But it could be as simple as what we've already seen where it might have been Arkansas or Alabama. I think it was Arkansas. The governor said a woman planning to leave the state for an abortion is a conspiracy to commit a crime, and she will be held legally liable. That woman can never go back to that state. Hyperpolarization. The tensions escalate until you get a bleeding Kansas type scenario. Eventually, the separation results in, let's say the woman gets the abortion. The doctor terminates the baby, and that guy drops to his knees, tears pouring from his face, screaming and pounding on the ground, knowing that his child was just killed. Do you think it ends there? I've asked conservatives, do you believe abortion is murder? They say yes. They're lying. I really do think so. Or they're unwilling to say, and I get it. We've mostly ever talked about this on the members only uncensored show over at timcast.com. Support our work. But the issue is as such. Do you believe abortion is murder? If the answer is yes, the question then becomes, do you believe the use of force, up to and including lethal force, is justified to prevent a murder? And of course, they believe the answer is yes. I mean, it's common self-defense law. That presents you with a serious problem. A doctor is about to perform an abortion, terminating the life of a baby that is viable outside the womb. Let's say it's 7 or 8 months. Do you believe it is justified to use force against that man to prevent this? And therein lies the impasse. I don't believe conservatives genuinely feel abortion is murder, because if it was, there'd be a lot different things happening in this country. But that's the point. And if we get to the point where geographic hyperpolarization results in 100% in Oklahoma, 100% in Colorado, no overlap, then Colorado says our neighbors next door are mass genociding babies. And if they truly believe that, why would they not say, we must stop such an atrocity? Or more importantly, like Bleeding Kansas, it is not an official government position. It is abolitionists versus abortionists. You'll have abortion abolitionists, like with Bleeding Kansas, anti-slave forces going in and just murdering slave owners. Why would you not see something similar? Moving down, he goes on to talk about, NPR talked about it in 2022, which brings us to how the post-crash economy will change the way you live and work, The Great Reset by Richard Florida, well before Klaus Schwab. After the Great Sort, there's conflict and crisis, and then a Great Reset. He says Florida outlines, the guy, the answer to the big sort is the Great Reset, which seems to outline an early draft of the plan that we'd recognize today as smart cities, 15-minute cities. That's right. In essence, by fleeing your blue state because of conservative influencers told you to, you are hastening the project and allowing communists to take over those states. Yep. And when the communists take over those states, what do? Expand their power and press upon right-wing states. That being said, James, telling someone to live in a communist state doesn't solve the problem. It just means you're telling them to suffer slowly instead of fleeing, living comfortably until the collapse. I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry. He says you're not actually consolidating red team power anywhere. Non-communists don't act like communists, so power consolidation isn't a thing. This leaves red states with a constant pressure to turn, internal and external, or go all bad. Eventually, in other words, the path results in rupture. It'll be secession, civil war, national divorce. He's using it as a catch-all term. The U.S. becomes fractured. I'm gonna stop from there because I agree with him up to that point and say this. The end result then becomes something quite simple. As we saw in 1861, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus in a corridor stretching from D.C. up to PA. For any reason, you could be arrested, detained, charged, detained without charge. They would just take you. They arrested, I believe it was 26 members of the Maryland legislature because Maryland was a slave state. They didn't care. The Constitution, your Bill of Rights, will be suspended immediately. That's why I say the win condition for the left is starting a civil war. It allows them to instantly, in these blue states, just consolidate all power in an instant, uniparty rule under the threat of civil war. They'll say neo-Confederate. They'll say racists and white supremacists that they've already been doing. And I don't have any good answers for you. Civil war is truly fascinating because, as most of you know, I've already talked quite a bit about it. And I'm not like a historian or anything. I've just read a few academic papers and read the history on it lightly. Great stories. Fort Sumter, the start of Civil War. Despite the fact that we say it started there, after this, the next battle, the Battle of Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run, people did not believe a civil war could happen, even though we say they were already in it. And so they picnicked on the hillside as the war started and people's guts were ripped from their bellies and bloody massacre. The Union forces fled back to D.C. and the Confederates cheered their victory. Everybody was surprised at how bloody the battle was. The Confederates got serious, but not serious enough. They decided not to march on D.C. For anybody who knows, Manassas is fairly close. They said, that proved our point. We're done. Abraham Lincoln then immediately said, to arms. And the South was crushed. It's a long story short, but basically the North invaded the South and began to say, you did not secede, you cannot secede, and we will quash this rebellion. After being invaded, the Confederates, they did not have the same support, the same weaponry or industry, nor the resources. Ultimately, what ends up happening is the South is being defeated, and then at some point they decide we need to actually invade the North to show them what the cost will be to this war. Gettysburg, utter failure. The North had better communications, better weapons, and there's a lot of stuff, in the nooks and crannies of history that I'm not going to get into to simplify things. But that was it. Man, it's crazy. Gettysburg is not far from here. And you go there and you can see the hills and they talk about all the men that were marching and it was tens of thousands or 100,000. It was nuts. And, the South needed food and resources. We're hoping by stealing supplies and seizing territory in the North, they could stop the North. Too little too late, I'm afraid. They ended up losing. Sherman's March to the Sea. Talk about psychotic and brutal and evil. But that's war, baby. Sherman was burning farms. Civilians were being killed as he marched and just scorched earth everything. Punishment, but also strategy. Prevent their ability to ever rebuild. And then, of course, Reconstruction. Texas secedes. The federal government says active state of rebellion. Several states then start lining up next to Texas, as already done. And the federal government goes in and immediately seizes control from the Republican governors. Does it even get to the point of civil war? Or does the federal government just go in and say, you now report directly to us. We are federalizing the state government because of insurrection. Declare insurrection, move in with National Guard, maybe war, maybe just a suspension of all of your civil rights. No more free speech. Hate speech is banned. No more internet. No more jobs. Central bank digital currencies in an instant. So what's the answer? I don't have one for you. Good luck. That's my answer. Because as James Lindsay pointed out, communists consolidate power and the post-liberals and the conservatives don't. So there, I don't know what you do. I think the win condition for us right now, electing Donald Trump. I hate to say it, but that too could just result in them pushing for civil war. And they may be lining things up right now for, in the event that Donald Trump wins, they use that as justification for them seceding and launching civil war. And the same game is played. But for the leftists, they'd be happy to see this country burn to the ground because they hate it as it is. And they'll align with whatever establishment forces to trigger a civil war because civil war gives them carte blanche. They'll do whatever they want, whenever they want. You will have no rights. The news media in these states will say things like the far right threat, the terror threat, the white supremacist threat, the neo-Confederates, et cetera, et cetera. And what can you do? I hope you've asked yourself some of these important questions about what happens in an event something like this does take place. We're in West Virginia. For proximity reasons, West Virginia will likely not be in one of these rebelling states. It's too close to D.C. What does that mean for commentary outlets like ours? We had someone call into the members only show and say, yeah, but the people who train in the National Guard, they're friends with each other from these other states. If it really went to civil war, they would disable area codes. You'd take your phone, You dial a Georgia area code, phone doesn't work. Can't make the call. Not only that, they would say these kinds of communications are treasonous, acts of sedition for National Guardsmen. They wouldn't let you communicate. It would be interesting how X would operate in Facebook. I'd imagine they'd start cutting off these states and shutting down the internet. The challenge would be financial infrastructure. If a civil war were to happen, does the state have the means to facilitate an economy outside of the federal government, the SWIFT payment system, Visa, MasterCard? I don't think so. So if whoever controls the flow of money will shut them down in 2 seconds. That's why the Confederates made their own money. And then, we're trying to promise that, hey, let us win. Help us out. They would go to foreign countries, say, give us weapons. The Union blockaded the South in the water, the Navy, so they couldn't get supplies. It's one of the reasons they lost. The Navy would play a major role in shutting down any, rebellious state. I got to tell you, man, the prospects are not great. But Donald Trump winning does give him legitimacy, control over the federal government, which would make it much more difficult. So, first step right now, nobody should be advocating for civil war, national divorce. It would not work out the way they think. We should be advocating for voting. I know. And everyone says, dude, you have to do it this way. You vote, you get your friends to vote, you register as many voters as possible, you elect Donald Trump, and you seize the legitimate claim to the authority in federal government. And we hope that Trump can clean things up. And in the event the left tries to secede, Trump can invoke the Insurrection Act and shut them down. We'll see. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.